If you enjoy a good story about human defiance, about that stubborn grit we show in the face of impossible odds, then you're in the right place. Consider liking this video and subscribing for more. The decorated Xylos instructor's voice boomed with the weight of 1,000 battles, silencing the briefing room. It is called the Devourer. It doesn't think. It doesn't negotiate. And there is no weapon in the known galaxy that can stop it. We are to accept our fate with honor. Those words just hung in the sterile, recycled air of Alliance Academy Station Epsilon, heavy and absolute. Around the holographic table, a dozen cadets from 6 different worlds all reacted in their own way. The Keltha twins flushed a deep, fearful blue. A wiry Xiphon delegate shivered, its many eyes losing focus. These cadets were the best and brightest of the Galactic Alliance, trained in every kind of combat imaginable. They were taught that for every threat there was a counter, for every shield a way through, but the Devourer was different. Instructor Vorlag, a Xylosian scarred from a dozen campaigns, let the silence stretch. He needed them to understand. This wasn't an enemy fleet. The Devourer was a cosmological event, a force of nature that just consumed everything in its path: energy, matter, life. For 200 years, the smartest minds in the Alliance had studied it, and they all came to the same conclusion: it was invulnerable. Its defenses could absorb any energy attack, from a focused laser to a plasma burst. Physical weapons were useless too. Its gravity fields just bent them harmlessly into space. Our long-range sensors have confirmed its trajectory. Vorlag continued, his voice flat, empty of hope. It will be here in 6 standard hours. All attempts to divert it have failed. Evacuation is futile. It's simply too fast. Our duty as officers is to face the end with dignity. We will not panic. We will not fall into chaos. We will meet oblivion as warriors. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each cadet. He saw fear, but he also saw discipline. He saw acceptance. In all of them, except for 1.T, the far end of the table, sat Cadet Marcus Webb. Human. He wasn't the strongest or the most brilliant tactician. But in his eyes, Instructor Vorlag didn't see fear or acceptance. He saw a cold, simmering rage, a defiance that was practically insubordination. Marcus wasn't looking at the instructor. He was staring at the holographic image of the Devourer, a swirling, featureless mass of pure black. While everyone else saw an unstoppable force, Marcus saw an opponent. When Vorlag dismissed them, the cadets filed out in somber silence. All except Marcus. He stood up, the scrape of his chair echoing in the empty room, and turned, not toward his quarters, but toward the long, quiet corridor that led to the station's armory. The Alliance armory was a cathedral of destructive power. Gleaming plasma rifles and I-don't cannons rested in their cradles. Graviton projectors, designed to crush starship hulls, sat silent and imposing. It was a collection of the most advanced, most lethal weapons ever conceived, and all of them were completely useless. Marcus walked past it all, his boots echoing on the alloy floor. He ignored the weapons of his time, the sophisticated tools of modern war. He was headed for a forgotten corner of the armory, a section designated as the Hall of Antiquated Armaments. It was basically a museum. Here, behind dusty containment fields, were the primitive tools of war from centuries ago, and there it was. His objective, mounted on a wall bracket. It was a long, ugly piece of wood and dark, oiled metal. It had no power cell, no energy signature, nothing. A relic. An M41, a pulse rifle, a standard infantry weapon from the late 21st century. It didn't fire plasma or ions. It fired bullets, small, chemically propelled slugs of metal. By galactic standards, it was a loud, inefficient, barbaric piece of junk. Marcus keyed in his access code for a maintenance and historical study override. The containment field hissed and vanished. He lifted the rifle. It was heavy, solid, real in a way the sleek energy weapons never were. He found a crate of ammunition brass-cased cartridges, each holding a simple lead core projectile. Primitive, obsolete, perfect. By the great filter, Marcus, what are you doing? The voice, a mix of chimes and clicks, belonged to his bunkmate, Threxus. The Xylosian stood at the entrance to the hall, his main eyes wide with disbelief. The instructor said to prepare for the end, Marcus said, slapping a magazine into the rifle. The sharp click-clack sounded like a crime in the silent armory. I'm preparing? With that? Threxus gestured with a slender hand. That's a slug thrower, a museum piece. Its kinetic energy wouldn't even scratch the devourer. It's suicide, Marcus. Worse, it's pointless. Marcus racked the charging handle, chambering around. The sound was brutal. He looked at his friend, his eyes burning with an intensity Threxus had never seen. He said no known weapon could stop it. He said all our weapons were useless. He talked about energy frequencies and graviton fields. But has anyone, in 200 years of watching this thing eat stars, ever just tried to shoot it with a rock? A bullet isn't a rock, and your logic is flawed. Threxus protested. Its gravity shield will deflect it. Maybe, Marcus conceded, shouldering the rifle. But I'd rather die on my feet with this in my hand than on my knees waiting for the end. At least this way, there's a chance. I will not die with honor. I will die fighting. That's the human way. The conviction in his voice was absolute. It was illogical, irrational, and went against everything Threxus had ever learned. It was, he realized, profoundly human. He looked at Marcus, then at the useless, advanced weapons lining the walls. A long moment passed. The gravitational field is weakest at the poles of its rotational axis, Threxus said softly, and it fluctuates during high-energy absorption. A flicker of a smile touched Marcus's face. Now we're talking. But I'll need more than one rifle. Suddenly, they weren't alone. A third figure emerged from the shadows. It was Corvin, a pragmatic Orthanian cadet known for her sharp mind. She held two long, wicked-looking blades of forged steel, taken from a display on ancient ground warfare. If you're going to be stupid, you might as well be stupid together, Corvin grunted, tossing one of the knives to Threxus. These have no energy signature. They won't be deflected. They just have to be delivered. An insane, desperate idea began to form. They weren't just planning to fight. They were planning to hunt. Their new briefing room was a cramped maintenance conduit overlooking a cargo bay. They projected the Devourer's schematics from a stolen datapad onto a grimy wall. Marcus, Threxus, and Corvin were no longer cadets preparing to die. They were conspirators plotting an impossible victory. Vorlag and the command staff are blinded by their own sophistication, Threxus said, tracing a line on the display. For 200 years, every study has focused on energy weapons. They decided that because nothing in the modern arsenal works, nothing can work. It's a failure of imagination. They're trying to outthink it, Marcus added, cleaning a second rifle. But sometimes the answer isn't complex. It's simple and brutal. Their whole plan hinged on one unproven theory. The Devourer's main defense was absorbing energy. But what if a purely kinetic impact, just the force of a solid object hitting it, was something it wasn't designed to handle? Not as an attack to be stopped, but as physical trauma to be endured. Like a punch. A very, very fast punch. The data logs from the USS Intrepid show something the analysts dismissed as a sensor ghost, Corvin said, pointing to a flicker on the display. The Intrepid was a science vessel that got too close 50 years ago and was destroyed in seconds. Just as the ship's warp core blew, flooding the Devourer with energy, its outer membrane showed a microsecond of physical hardening. A state change. Threxus' eyes lit up. It braces for impact, like an animal tensing its muscles. During that moment of maximum energy absorption, its gravitational field has a fractional instability. A window, barely a nanosecond, but it's there. The plan was born from that nanosecond. They couldn't destroy it, but they might be able to wound it. If a projectile could get through that window and hit the membrane while it was in that hardened, brittle state, it might not be absorbed. It might create a crack, a wound. And what happens when a thing made of pure energy gets a hole punched in it? They worked frantically. The station's alarms began a soft, mournful chime, signaling the 5-hour mark. Marcus gathered every projectile weapon he could find. Corvin fashioned crude launchers for the steel knives by strapping them to fire extinguishers. Threxus, meanwhile, was their navigator, hunched over the datapad, writing code to sync their attack with the station's own futile barrage. As the 1-hour mark hit, an eerie silence fell over the station. On the bridge, Instructor Vorlag stood watching the main view screen. The Devourer was here, a hole in space that seemed to drink the starlight. All defensive cannons are on automated sequence, the commander said, his voice heavy with resignation. Vorlag nodded, but a nagging thought bothered him. 3 cadets were not in their quarters: Corvin, Threxus, and the human, Marcus Webb. A quick check showed an unauthorized access to the historical weapons division. Vorlag thought of the look in the human's eyes. The rage, the defiance. It was illogical. It was insubordinate. It was hope. And for the first time in a century, Instructor Vorlag felt a flicker of uncertainty. Meanwhile, 3 decks below, Marcus, Threxus, and Corvin climbed into a small maintenance skiff, aiming for an exposed relay on the outer hull, a vantage point that offered a clear, if suicidal, line of sight. Chronometers synced, Threxus announced. Good luck. Marcus chambered around. Luck is for people without a plan. Outside the viewport, the Devourer loomed. It wasn't a dot in the distance anymore. It was a sky-filling abyss, a storm of non-light that warped space itself. Inside the skiff, the air was thick with tension. Threxus stared at his datapad, Corvin gripped her makeshift launcher, and Marcus stood braced, his breathing slow and steady. He was no longer a cadet. He was a hunter, and his prey was a god. Main cannon charging. Threxus called out, 10 seconds. On the station's bridge, the commander whispered, fire. A colossal beam of pure energy slammed into the Devourer. It was spectacular, overwhelming, and did absolutely nothing. The Devourer just drank it all. Energy absorption at maximum. Threxus screamed, now Marcus? Now. Time slowed. As the last of the beam was swallowed, Marcus saw it a subtle shimmer across the Devourer's surface. It was bracing itself. He raised his rifle, the simple iron sights aligning on the heart of the beast. He didn't aim for a weak point. He aimed for the center. He squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle was a violent tear in the silence. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, a satisfying punch. The bullet, a tiny piece of metal pushed by a chemical explosion, flew across the void. It was a primitive whisper against the roar of the cosmos. On the bridge, the tactical officers barely saw it. An anomalous kinetic reading. Debris, maybe. But Vorlag's eyes were locked on it. He saw the tiny projectile flying true. The bullet struck. There was no explosion. For a heart-stopping second, nothing. Then, a flicker. A small, dark fissure appeared where the bullet had hit. It wasn't healing. It was a wound. A physical wound in something that was supposed to be beyond physical harm. It worked. Corvin roared, slamming her fist on her console. 2 fire extinguishers erupted, sending the steel knives tumbling through space. One of them hit near the bullet hole, and the fissure spiderwebbed. The Devourer reacted. For the first time in recorded history, it stopped. A low groan echoed through the void, not as sound, but as a psychic wave of pure anguish. The energy it had just absorbed began arsing uncontrollably from the new wound. It was bleeding. Keep firing, Marcus yelled, slamming in a fresh magazine. They unleashed everything they had. A hailstorm of primitive, solid junk flew across the void. Each impact was a pinprick, but each one widened the tears in the devourers being .it reeled. The god thing, the unstoppable force, convulsed in agony. Its perfect form began to unravel. The psychic scream intensified, a wave of pure terror and confusion. It had never known pain. It had never known injury. It had never known fear. And it was learning all three from a species it would have wiped out without a second thought. The devourer didn't flee. It just recoiled. It contracted, desperately trying to fix the violations to its body. The attack on Station Epsilon was forgotten, replaced by a new alien instinct, self-preservation. After a long, agonizing moment, the entity began to withdraw, pulling back into the deep blackness, not defeated, but deterred, wounded. Silence. On the station bridge, everyone just stared at the tactical display in awe. The impossible had just happened. Instructor Vorlag lowered his head. He knew. Commander, he said, dispatch a shuttle to the outer hull. Bring them to the bridge, and tell them to come unarmed. They've done enough with weapons for one day. When Marcus, Threxus, and Corvin were escorted onto the bridge, they were met with stunned silence. Marcus still clutched his rifle, a relic that now felt like the most powerful thing in the galaxy. They expected to be court-martialed. Instead, Instructor Vorlag walked slowly towards them. He stopped before Marcus and looked at the primitive rifle. He saw the wood, the steel, the simple, brutal design. He had dismissed it. The entire Alliance had dismissed it, looking for complex answers, while the real solution lay in the history of a chaotic, savage, and impossibly stubborn race. He placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the bridge. You have disobeyed a direct order, Cadet Webb, Vorlag said. You have violated a dozen protocols. You risked everything on a reckless, unsanctioned, and utterly illogical maneuver. He paused, his grip tightening. You also saved us all. You taught us something today. That just because we don't have a solution doesn't mean one doesn't exist. You taught us that sometimes the most advanced weapon in the galaxy isn't a beam of light. It's the will to fight when all hope is lost. A new directive went out from Alliance High Command that day, sending ripples through the galaxy. It was short: begin a comprehensive study of PRE spaceflight human history and their primitive warfare doctrines. We have been blind for too long. The M41, a pulse rifle, wasn't returned to the museum. It was placed in a new, brightly lit display case on the main bridge, right next to the command chair. No longer a relic, but a symbol. A reminder that when you face the impossible, when all the science and logic fails, sometimes the answer is to just defiantly load a weapon. Anyway, thank you for joining us. If you believe in the power of human ingenuity, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories from across the galaxy. What did you think of Cadet Webb's tactics? Let us know in the comments. And until next time, keep challenging the impossible.